Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Ever feel like the weight of the world is just
Yeah.
on your shoulders?
Yeah.
Like you're being squeezed dry by forces
Yeah.
completely beyond your control.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
Well, that's exactly how the indigenous people of South America felt under Spanish rule in the 18th century. We're talking Andes Mountains, a fight for freedom.
And a story that really mirrors what was happening at the same time over in North America with the American Revolution.
Exactly. The Tupac Amaru Rebellion. We are going deep
Yeah.
today into this story, and we're drawing our insights from the stuff you missed in history class podcast episode about the rebellion. So get ready for some seriously captivating details. Okay, so imagine Peru, the Andes Mountains, rugged peaks, sweeping valleys, and the majority of the population are the indigenous Quechua people. And they've been under Spanish rule now for over 200 years at this point.
In Spain, well, like a lot of colonial powers, they had a pretty clear agenda: expand the empire, extract as much wealth as possible, primarily through silver mining, and enforce their religion, Christianity,
Right.
on the native population.
Sounds like
Yeah.
a recipe for tension, right?
Right.
So how did they actually try to achieve these goals?
They set up a pretty complex system of governance with these local officials called corregidors. They basically acted as mini kings,
Yeah.
representing the Spanish crown, enforcing the laws. And then you also had the curacas, who were indigenous leaders. They acted as intermediaries between the Spanish authorities and their own people.
Got it. So it was like this layered system of control
Oh, it's real.
with the corregidors really holding all the power.
Exactly. And the system,
Oh,
I mean, it bred resentment among the indigenous population.
I bet. What were some of the most hated policies that they enforced?
Well, there was the Mito system, which was essentially forced labor, indigenous men, drafted to work in the silver mines, which were incredibly dangerous, often hundreds of miles from their homes.
Wow. So not only forced to work in these terrible conditions, but also ripped away from their communities.
Yeah. And it gets worse. They had to buy goods from Spain, whether they needed them or not, these forced purchases, along with a bunch of taxes, sales taxes and a head tax. Just an incredible burden.
Imagine being forced to buy things you don't need
Sure.
and then being taxed on them. It's outrageous.
Right.
And then, if I'm remembering this right, King Charles III of Spain comes along with his Bourbon reforms, which were supposed to modernize the empire, but actually ended up making life harder for the indigenous people.
That's right. Part of this broader trend in Europe at the time, towards centralized power and economic control, intended to streamline the administration of the colonies and increase revenue for the Spanish crown.
So more control, more taxes, more hardship for people already struggling. It's like squeezing blood from a stone. No wonder there was unrest.
Absolutely. And this brings us to Jose Gabriel Condorcanqui, a man born into this world of oppression, but would rise up and challenge it.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Tell me about this Jose Gabriel Condorcanqui.
Born around 1742, led a fascinating life. Merchant, mule driver. So he traveled extensively, saw firsthand the injustices happening. He was fluent in both Spanish and Quechua, the language of the Inca. And he claimed lineage to the last Inca emperor, Tupac Amaru first.
So a man of two worlds, straddling both indigenous and Spanish cultures. I can see how that would give him a unique perspective.
Yeah, and his experiences shaped him into a leader, a man who would ultimately take on the mantle of his ancestor and ignite this rebellion.
So how did he go from merchant and mule driver to revolutionary leader? Was there a specific incident?
There was. Condorcanqui inherited the position of curaca, a leadership role, in 3 towns. This gave him firsthand experience with the corruption and the abuse of power, rampant in the Spanish colonial system. He even traveled to Lima, the capital of the Viceroyalty of Peru, saw the inner workings of the colonial government, and probably noticed some vulnerabilities along the way.
So he wasn't just a bystander. He was actively engaged,
Yeah.
trying to work within the system.
Exactly. But there's this one incident that really pushed him over the edge. The corregidor in his region, Antonio de Arriaga, notorious for his cruelty, organized this brutal labor draft for a silver mine, forced people to travel 600 miles to work in just horrific
And
conditions.
600 miles.
Yeah.
That's inhuman.
It was a breaking point for Condorcanqui. He realized that peaceful appeals were going nowhere. Drastic action was needed. And so on November 4th, 1780, he set his plan in motion.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. What did he do?
Well, Condorcanqui, using his knowledge of indigenous and Spanish customs, lured Arriaga to his home under false pretenses and captured him.
Wow. Talk about a bold move. So what did he do with Arriaga once he had him?
This is where his cunning really shows. He used Arriaga's seal to forge letters summoning local leaders, military officials, even entrepreneurs, to his town for what they thought was an official meeting.
That's brilliant. He was playing them at their own game. What happened when all these people showed up?
Thousands of people gathered, unaware that the corregidor was a prisoner, and it's during this time that Condor Concrete decides to embrace his heritage and assume the mantle of his ancestor. He takes on the name Tupac Amaru, a powerful symbol of Inca resistance.
This is incredible. So he's got this huge crowd, and he's about to make his move. What happened next? Did he just announce, hey, everybody, I've captured the corregidor, let's revolt?
He had a much more dramatic plan. November 10th, 1780. Tupac Amaru stages this grand spectacle, this carefully orchestrated event, designed to rally the people.
Yeah.
He stands before the crowd and makes a shocking announcement. He tells them that the King of Spain has abolished the Mita system, the forced purchases, all the taxes that had been crushing them.
Wait, he lied to them.
He did, but it was a calculated lie, a strategic move to tap into their desire for freedom and justice. These people had been suffering for generations. They were desperate for any hope.
So he gave them a taste of what life could be like.
Exactly. And the crowd went wild. They were ecstatic, believing that their prayers had been answered.
What a powerful moment.
Right.
But I imagine the celebration was short-lived. What about Arriaga?
Right. Tupac Amaru knew he couldn't keep up the charade forever. He needed to make a statement, a definitive break.
So what did he do?
On that same day, after riling up the crowd, he brought Arriaga forward, forced him to wear a Franciscan habit, a symbolic gesture, to humiliate the Spanish authorities, and then had him publicly executed.
Wow. Talk about a mic drop. Why the Franciscan habit, though?
A deliberate act of defiance. Remember, Spain had imposed Christianity, often using the Franciscan order to do it. By making Arriaga wear the habit, Tupac Amaru was rejecting not just Spanish authority, but also their religion, their entire system.
In the execution itself.
Not a quick death. They tried to hang him. But the rope broke, and he ended up being strangled. A gruesome spectacle, one that sent shockwaves through the Andes.
This was a message to the Spanish. The rebellion has begun.
Exactly. And with Arriaga's death, the flames of rebellion were truly ignited. But this was just the beginning. He needed to build a movement, rally people to his cause, create a force powerful enough to challenge Spain.
So how did he go about doing that?
He was strategic. He knew he needed to build a broad coalition, unite people from different backgrounds against a common enemy.
So it wasn't just an indigenous uprising.
Exactly. He targeted only Spanish officials, symbols of authority, spared priests, mestizos, Creoles.
Smart, trying to isolate the Spanish authorities.
Yeah. Precisely. And he was effective. He delivered speeches in both Spanish and Quechua, connecting directly with the people.
That's incredible. A true leader.
And his victories early on added to the momentum. He traveled from town to town, liberating prisoners, abolishing taxes, burning down symbols of Spanish authority.
So dismantling the system piece by piece.
Yeah, he was building a movement from the ground up.
Amazing. So we've got Tupac Amaru, charismatic leader, building a rebellion, winning victories, gaining momentum. Sounds like he's on the verge of something truly extraordinary.
He was. But history is rarely a simple tale of triumph. There were challenges ahead.
This is where things get complicated.
Exactly.
The rebellion grows, the stakes get higher, and I doubt Spain is just going to sit by and watch their empire crumble.
You are absolutely right. And as Tupac Amaru's rebellion grew, it became a real problem for the Spanish crown. They couldn't just ignore it.
I can only imagine the panic in those halls of power. In Lima and Madrid, here's this indigenous leader invoking the Inca Empire, rallying people, and actually winning battles.
Yeah, it was a wake-up call for them, a reminder that their control was not as absolute as they thought. And their response, swift and brutal. They assembled a massive army to crush the rebellion.
So the tide is turning, the Spanish war machine is on the move. What does this mean for Tupac Amaru?
As the army closed in, the rebellion started to change. It went from being strategic, targeted, to, well, more widespread, and unfortunately more violent.
Things are getting messy. It seems like that initial goal of justice and liberation got lost in the chaos.
Yeah, it's a good observation. The growth of the rebellion, while a sign of success, also brought new challenges. As more people joined, it became harder for Tupac Amaru to maintain control. And sadly, atrocities were committed on both sides.
It's always tragic when a fight for freedom turns into senseless violence. Can you tell me more about what actually happened?
There were reports of both rebel and Spanish forces attacking civilians, looting, destroying property, all fueled by fear and anger.
It just deepens the divide.
Yeah.
Imagine the Spanish use this violence to their advantage.
Of course. They could use it to justify their own brutality, paint the rebels as savages, demonize Tupac Amaru.
It's a cynical strategy.
Effective.
How did Tupac Amaru respond to this?
He tried to rein it in, issued proclamations, condemning the violence, re-emphasizing his goal of a just and fair society. He even called for the emancipation of enslaved Africans.
Wow. That's really ahead of his time.
It was, but his pleas were largely ignored. The situation was out of control. And to make things worse, the Catholic Church excommunicated Tupac Amaru and his followers.
Wait, what? But he was a devout Catholic.
He was, and that's what made it so devastating. It was a blow to his legitimacy, his moral authority.
I say losing the church's support would be a huge setback.
It was. They use it as a propaganda tool, portraying him as a heretic, a threat to both God and king.
Religion being used for political gain. A classic move.
It was. And this, along with the violence and the arrival of the Spanish army, really marked a turning point.
The walls are closing in.
They are. Tupac Amaru is forced to retreat, flee for his life. And this is when betrayal enters the picture.
Oh no, not betrayal.
In April 1781, Tupac Amaru's wife, Michaela Bastidas, a key figure in the rebellion herself, and two of his sons were captured.
Michaela Bastidas, captured.
It seems she was betrayed by someone close to the movement.
Devastating.
It was...
What did Tupac Amaru do?
He kept fighting, but the odds were against him. And tragically, he too was betrayed, lured into a trap by one of his own followers, a man named Ventura Landieta.
Ventura Landieta, why?
The reasons are still debated. Maybe a bribe, maybe a personal grudge.
A reminder that even in noble causes,
A trust can be fragile. And with Tupac Amaru captured, the Spanish had won. They had their prize.
so what happened to him?
They put him, Michaela Bastidas, and their sons on trial.
I doubt it was a fair trial.
It was a show trial designed to humiliate them, make an example of them.
Bracing myself here.
May 18th, 1781, a public execution in Cusco, the ancient Inca capital, a display of cruelty. They forced Tupac Amaru to watch as his family was tortured and killed. They executed his eldest son, and while the exact details of Michaela Bastidas' death are unclear, some accounts suggest she was beaten, her tongue cut out, and then strangled in front of her husband.
Oh my
And
God.
then they turned on Tupac Amaru.
Please tell me they just killed him quickly.
They cut out his tongue, tied his limbs to horses, trying to pull him apart.
No.
His limbs were dislocated, but didn't separate. And finally, they beheaded him.
This is horrific.
His youngest son, only 10 years old, was forced to watch the entire thing.
A message to anyone who dared to resist.
It was.
Did it work? Did they crush the rebellion?
It continued for 2 more years under new leaders, many of whom took on the name Tupac Amaru.
So his legacy lived on.
It did. But the Spanish learned their lesson. They tightened their grip, implemented harsher restrictions, forbade any discussion of Tupac Amaru, tried to erase him.
But they failed. His story is still being told today.
It is a testament to his message, his courage,
Yeah.
and his sacrifice.
It's a heavy story. But
Absolutely. And it raises so many questions that we still think about today.
it does. I'm glad we're talking about it.
Me too. And it's important to remember that this is just one of many stories of resistance and rebellion.
So many stories out there.
Exact.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.
Uncovering these stories, sharing them with you.
If you're as captivated as we are, check out the show notes.
And if you're enjoying these deep dives, subscribe to our podcast.
We're just getting started. But for now, let's step back and think about some of the bigger questions.
Okay.
What if Tupac Amaru had succeeded? What if he had created an independent Inca state?
The what-ifs of history,
Yeah.
always so interesting.
Let's imagine a world where he wins, drives out the Spanish, an independent Inca state is reborn.
It wouldn't have been easy.
What obstacles would they face?
Internally, the legacy of Spanish colonialism.
Rebuilding after centuries of oppression.
Exactly. Reestablishing their own systems of governance, their own laws, their own economic policies.
A complete overhaul.
It would have been. And then there's the question of national unity. The Inca Empire had been fragmented, divided. Forging a sense of unity would be crucial.
So practicalities of governing, rebuilding the economy, creating a national identity, all while facing threats.
Right. And don't forget about the geopolitical situation. Other indigenous groups, some allied with the Spanish, the Creole.
Internal and external conflicts.
Exactly.
They need an incredible leader.
They would.
Could Tupac Amaru have done it?
It's hard to say. He had charisma, courage, and understanding of both cultures.
And his vision. a just and equitable society.
True. But leading a rebellion is different from governing.
Very different.
But regardless, his rebellion was a pivotal moment.
It was.
Exposed the brutality of colonialism, inspired others, a reminder that history isn't inevitable.
We shape it.
We do.
Well said. I think we'll wrap up here.
Sounds good.
If you enjoyed this, check out the show notes.
And if you're new here, subscribe to the podcast.
Until next time, keep exploring. Okay, so we're back, and we've been talking about the Tupac Amaru rebellion and all the challenges it faced. But I want to go back to that what if. We're discussing what if Tupac Amaru had actually succeeded in driving out the Spanish? What if he'd created that independent Inca state? What would that have looked like?
It's fun to think about, right? Imagining those alternate timelines and, yeah, like we were saying, there would have been a ton of challenges ahead of them, right? Internally, I mean, the biggest hurdle would probably be dealing with the leftover effects of being under Spanish rule for so long.
Right, because they'd be rebuilding a whole society from scratch, basically, after centuries of oppression. So what parts of that colonial legacy would have been the hardest to shake off?
Well, for one thing, just reestablishing their own systems of government, a
Yeah.
huge undertaking, you know? The Spanish had their whole administrative structure, legal codes, economic policies, all that stuff. The Inca would have had to dismantle it all and come up with something totally new, something that reflected their own values and traditions.
Wow, so a total system reboot. That's a lot to handle.
It would have been a massive project, for sure. And then you've got the issue of national unity, too. Under Spanish rule, the Inca Empire had been broken up into these administrative pieces that didn't really align with traditional boundaries or loyalties. So creating a sense of unity, a shared Inca identity that would have been essential for the new state to survive.
So you've got the practical stuff like governing and rebuilding the economy, and then on top of that, trying to get everyone on the same page about what it means to be Inca, all while dealing with potential threats from their neighbors, right?
Exactly. And remember, the Andes region wasn't exactly a peaceful paradise. There were other indigenous groups, some of whom had sided with the Spanish during the rebellion. Plus, you've still got the Creoles, the Spaniards born in the Americas, to contend with.
So not just outside threats, but possible conflicts brewing within the new Inca state as well.
Yeah.
They would have needed a leader who was incredibly skilled and had a clear vision to navigate all of that.
No doubt about it. Someone who could bring people together, inspire them to overcome these huge obstacles, and basically build a nation from the ground up.
Makes you wonder, do you think Tupac Amaru himself could have pulled it off? Could he have gone from leading a rebellion to actually running a country?
It's a tough question to answer. He definitely had the charisma, the bravery, and he knew both Inca and Spanish cultures really well.
And his ideas about creating a fair and just society? I mean, his call to free enslaved Africans shows he was thinking about equality for everyone. That suggests he might have had what it takes to build a nation where everyone had a place.
That's a good point. His willingness to go against the grain, to embrace radical ideas that could have been a real driving force for positive change. But then again, leading a revolution is one thing, governing a whole country, that's a whole other ballgame.
You're right. Building a new society needs different skills. Compromise diplomacy, the ability to bring people together and make tough choices.
Exactly. And it's impossible to know if Tupac Amaru had those skills. But whether or not he could have successfully led an independent Inca state, his rebellion was a turning point in Andean history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It showed the world just how brutal Spanish colonialism was, sparked a spirit of resistance that continues to this day, and inspired countless people who came after him to fight for justice.
Yeah, and it reminds us that history isn't set in stone.
Yeah.
We have the power to shape it through our choices, our actions, the things we believe in and strive for.
Well said. Well, I think that about wraps up this episode of The Deep Dive. We've really dug deep into a fascinating and complex moment in history.
If you've been as gripped by the story as we have, I encourage you to check out the resources we mentioned in the show notes. There's a whole world of information out there waiting to be discovered.
And if you're new to The Deep Dive, don't forget to subscribe. We've got tons of incredible stories lined up exploring all kinds of topics from ancient civilizations to modern mysteries.
Until next time, keep exploring. Keep asking questions. Keep those minds engaged.
And keep diving deep with us on The Deep Dives.